Hey everyone, and welcome back to Citywide Blackout, your home for the best creators from around the world. I'm your host, Max Bowen. Now, from bionics to black holes to warp factors to wormholes, the Science Fictionary has the answers to any questions you've had about the many different kinds of words you read in sci-fi, fantasy, or horror genres. Author Robert W. Bly joins me. Robert, welcome to the show. It is so cool to have you here.
Max, thank you for having me. I'm glad to do it.
All right. You know, I have never come across a dictionary about science fiction or fantasy terms. I'm curious about how this whole thing got started.
Well, I'm 65, and I've been a science fiction and fantasy fan since I was a kid. So it's over half a century. And I'm a rabid fan. It's very central to me. And one day I was thinking, I came across some terms in a book I was reading, and I said, I wish there was like this was all in a central repository, like a book, and like some kind of a science fictionary. And as soon as word, science fictionary, that title, I said it to myself, I said, that's a book. I opened up a file in Word that second and started making lists of words that I would have in that book.
That is so cool. So it was just like, hey, we need this thing, and here we go. Yeah. So now some of the words that you've got defined here, they don't have like a definition prior to this. They were just like made up words in some cases, or their definitions were so all over the place. How'd you go about finding a concrete definition that worked?
Well, a couple of different methods. The main one, however, is I don't have, and most people don't have, a photographic memory, but I have a very, not a photographic or near photographic, but a pretty close to photographic memory for a couple of topics. Subjects. Can't remember history, American history, but for pop culture, I seem to have a near photographic memory. So a lot of this was already in my gray matter. And that was the advantage. And the other is I've been a collector of these materials, books, comic books, for decades, and I've got a big room attached to my office in the house that is filled with these books. So when I got interested in doing it, and I was said, well, what does that mean? I could go in the room, and chances are I could find, the book, or the short story that had it. So that's how I got started.
Oh, wow. Were there any words that really just like stumped you?
Oh, yeah. There's what stumps me. It's not so much stumps. It's that if I hadn't read a particular science fiction author or book or seen a movie, and someone would say to me, well, why don't you include something about, like I never really watched Doctor Who. Mm. So, he said, why don't you have the Daleks? I said, what is that? So, of course, you could look it up, and I bought a couple of Doctor Who books to immerse myself. Never was didn't really get into the videos, but things that it's such a broad field that there's so many things that I don't know, haven't seen. So those are the ones that would stump me.
Oh, yeah. I've never been much of a Doctor Who fan myself. I probably feel like turning my nerd card when this is all over. But, yeah, I never really read the books. I watched a bit of the shows, but for whatever reason, it just didn't catch me.
Exactly. It's funny you said that. It didn't catch. Now, of course, you can't be a fan. You and I can't be a fan of everything. Probably the vast majority of stuff we're not fans of and haven't even seen. But that was one that was popular, and that and Stargate never caught me.
I liked the movie. I still have it today, actually. I watch it every so often. But the series, I think I watched like 2 episodes and thought, this isn't really hooking me.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's just good movie, but maybe not good enough to be its own series. But then again, that's my opinion. I know there's a lot of fans. Yeah, it lasted for, I think, like a bunch of seasons, lots of fans. So in the end, just our opinion. You guys love what you love. So did you have to do a lot of that immersion into different series and movies and comics when you came across words like, I've never seen this before?
I did it both ways. I came across some words and said, I don't know that. I better go back to the source for this. But also, I said to myself, for example, and this is another immersion mission I shouldn't make or I will be kicked out of the club. I never really was into Game of Thrones. And my younger son, who's 30, he loves it, and he read all the books. So I had them here, but, when I started to write the book, I had to go to his bookshelf in his room. He doesn't live here anymore, but he left the books. and fortunately I had them here so I could reference them. But until then, I had never read them, and I never watched the TV show.
Wow, yeah, I have to make the same confession. I never even knew that the books existed before the series came out. I did not know who George R. Martin was.
For Game of Thrones, I was a huge George R. Martin fan and still am, because he wrote couple of the best things in a couple of genres. He wrote one of the best horror novels called Fever Dream.
Ooh.
About a vampire. And he wrote a short story that is a classic that you should just track down after this if you really want to read something good, called Sand Kings.
Ooh. Okay, yeah, I'm checking this one out because I'm always in the market for a really good horror story. That's another question I was kind of wondering. Did you have to dive a lot into the horror genres?
Well, what I did originally, I just said I'll call it the Science Fictionary and do science fiction. But, within 6 hours after starting my list, I said, wait a minute, this crosses over. So it can't just be science fiction. It has to be fantasy and it has to be horror.
Yeah.
And those are the three genres that I cover. But fortunately for me, I actually love all three of them. I would say in order of preference, science fiction first, maybe horror second, and fantasy third. But I like them all. I love them all.
So in this book, you're not just defining things like, oh, what is a black hole? What is, warp speed? But you're probably defining things like what are ghosts and what are demons and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, you're defining things that they are, as they are referred to in science fiction, fiction, fantasy, mythology, and so forth. But some of them, you're defining things that are in science fiction that people have heard of, but they don't really know the precise definition. For example, a good warp factor. How fast is warp factor 3? Most people would say it's 3 times the speed of light, but it isn't. In the Star Trek Concordance, it's the warp factor cubed. So if you're going warp factor 3, you're going 27 times the speed of light. That's, to me, a fun fact.
Wow, I didn't know that. I always thought it was the same thing. I thought it was just like, 3 times the speed of light, which right off the bat is actually insane to think about.
And everybody thinks that, by the way.
Wow.
Or then there's dig into your going with warp factor. Then there's another one that was fun. What are the 3 modes of propulsion on the USS Enterprise? And most people only get 2 of them.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, the warp and the impulse engines.
Yeah, but there's also, when they're going slower, the thrusters.
Oh, wow. No, you're right. You're right, because I remember that from certain movies when they were like leaving space docks over, they would use like maneuvering thrusters to kind of get out.
Yeah, or in one of the more recent ones with Chris Pine, they're sort of plummeting to Earth or falling, and then they hit the thrusters, and you see these flames coming out of the bottom of the saucer, little jets, and it's that's the thruster. Oh damn.
This is really like blowing like my my nerd mind up a little bit. It's so cool.
Yeah, I love this stuff. So like one of my favorite, I love pop culture. I say pop culture lore, pop culture trivia. If someone's really into it, here's my question. If you can answer this, I say you are a geek. What is Herman Munster's home address?
Oh crap! I don't know. Damn it.
When you hear it, you'll know it. 1313 Mockingbird Lane.
Okay. Yep.
That's sort of like the entry point. If you know that, you're a nerd. If you don't, you like it, but you're not a fanatic.
Fair enough. Yeah, I would say I'm not really a fanatic, but oh wow. Now some of these terms, of course, have been around for decades and decades. Did you have a hard time pinning down precise definitions for some of them?
I would say this. You could find a definition in many places. What's the challenge is to reconcile differing definitions. But that's not really that tough. For example, if you said, what is a vampire? You know what a vampire is. But Then when you get into what are their weaknesses, for example, different sources say different things.
Mm-hmm.
For example, most vampire fiction, sunlight destroys them.
Mm-hmm.
But in some books and movies, they burst into flame.
Yep.
Another one, they just wither and die. And in some vampire fiction, sunlight doesn't kill them. Like which I'm not a particular fan of it, but Twilight, when they get hit with the sunlight, it doesn't hurt them at all. They just give off sparkles, which I found ludicrous. I'm not a fan of it. So you have to reconcile what's the right answer. And in some of the entries in the dictionary, I couldn't reconcile. I just said, this says this says this, and this says this, and that's interesting.
Yeah.
Other times, the commonality seems to be that, vampires do this or werewolves do this or whatever.
Sure, yeah. I imagine it's also hard for some things like what is a demon? I mean, that's such like a broad term in some cases. How do you kind of narrow that down to one specific concept?
With demon, what I actually did is I took sort of the generic definition, and then I gave 3 or 4 examples of references, from it. And I found an interesting thing about these demonologists in the church in different centuries were estimating how many demons existed, and that was a little interesting numerology. For example, this Dutch demonologist in the 16th century calculated from some biblical text that the number of demons was 4,439,556, and these were divided into 666 legions. Interesting stuff like that.
Ooh.
Fun facts, and I wouldn't know without digging.
Geez, that alone could be a book.
Yeah, I'm sure there are books on demonology. I probably have some in my library, but yeah, that's a whole subject unto itself.
Yeah, wow. So, were there any words that really stumped you that you were just like, I don't know what to say?
Yeah, there's a couple of words from what I would call sophisticated science fiction, like Philip K. Dick writes a lot of what I think are intellectual books, although they've been made into popular movies. And some of the terms there are a little confusing. Like he's got a term called UBIK, U-B-I-K, and it's in the book. I could read it, but I won't attempt to do it off the top of my head. But when you read the books, it's a little difficult to figure out what it is and how it works. And I found that even within other science fiction books. There's a science fiction book that came out recently, a novel called Camp Zero, and there's a concept called flick, and it's like an implant, sort of like the Matrix, but not really. And you had to read carefully to try to figure it out and distill what is a flick, and it was interesting.
Cool.
Basically, a flick was a device that was implanted in the person at birth, and that gave them universal access, basically, to the Internet of all things, plus everyone else's thoughts and lives and memories.
Wow. So this obviously had you diving into a lot of stuff that you previously weren't really reading or watching.
Because people say to me, it's obvious the book is like 330 pages or whatever. People say, is it comprehensive? If it was comprehensive, it'd be 5,000 pages.
Yeah, seriously. So were there any like series or authors or creators that you wound up being a big fan of?
Well, the people who were sort of the beta readers for this book, they all had the same experience. They would tell me, I read the book and I made a list of 54 science fiction movies I haven't seen that I want to watch, or I made a list of 14 science fiction authors I've never read, and I had the same thing. So, I would find stuff, that, I hadn't delved into, and there's so much out there. Like, I had a definition from the book John Brunner, Stands on Zanzibar, which was an interesting definition of how he got the title. And basically it's based on the population density of Earth, that if you put everyone on Earth on Zanzibar, they all have to stand shoulder to shoulder vertically. And which was an odd fact. And I said, I've never read Stand on Zanzibar. I've never read Shockwave Rider. Stephen King has a great quote. He says, you realize as you get older, you're never going to live to read all the books you want to read. And as I get older, not even a fraction of them. So you're never going to keep up. But it's fun trying.
I'll bet. Yeah, I have entire shelves filled with books, and just this alone, I know I'm never going to get to them all. Some of them, sure. Most of them, probably not.
Well, when I do that, and people say to me, well, why do you have all these books? I mean, you're not going to read them, so just get rid of them. I say, you don't understand. A bookcase is like a wine rack.
Yeah.
You walk up, what do I want today? You don't, just because you're drinking Chardonnay, you don't throw out all the Pinots. You keep them for when you want them.
Exactly.
So it's like a treasure chest. You can say, I'll wander over there. And I'm sure you do this. Sometimes I'm just in the room with the library, and I look over and say, that looks interesting. I either did read it and I want to read it again, or maybe I should sit down and read some of it.
Yeah. I love reading a book for a second time because I find that I always catch something I missed before. I'll be like,
that is so true.
Mm-hmm.
And there are, again, now at my, I'm torn about reading books too many times, because you say if I'm doing, this 300-page novel a second time, that's another new one that I'm not reading. But there are certain books, and a few of them, that I can read over and over again. Probably for me, I don't know if you know, or if you read or know who Roger Zelazny is, but his book, Lord of Light, is on that list for me. To read it over and over again.
Yeah. For me, anything by Jonathan Mayberry is always going to get at least 3 reads, because his stuff is just so fantastic.
Yeah, now I had never read Jonathan Mayberry, but he's sometimes featured in the Writers of the Future series by Galaxy Publishing, and I know those folks, so they send me, the books if his stories are in it.
Ooh, yeah, his stuff. I'm honestly surprised that we haven't seen his stuff on Netflix. Actually, no, we did see V Wars. He did do that, but that's it. I'm honestly surprised that the rest of his stuff has not been on Netflix or some other streaming service by now.
Yeah, I mean, another one, like a name that's so well known, but I never read until I did this book. I said I should have something in this book about the works of Neil Stephenson. I said, oh my God, I've never read Neil Stephenson, so I got a couple of them.
Nice. So this is really like expanded your entire world.
Yeah, I mean, my problem always, I've had a guilt complex about who I am and what I am, because basically I don't do much. I mean, I've raised my kids, but so I did that, but I don't do much aside from read and write. Those are the things I like. I mean, those are I hate the word passions, but they are the passions. And, I feel sometimes guilty that that's all I do. But hey, it is what it is. That's what I am.
If it makes you happy, that's it.
That's what I say. Yeah.
Exactly. All right. Prior to this interview, when I was reading about the book, I also decided to learn a little bit about you, and I was surprised to see that I was expecting to meet another horror writer or science fiction writer, but instead you do marketing books, which is fantastic. I'm kind of curious if you had to learn a different kind of writing or what have you when you wrote this book, The Science Fictionary.
No and no. Yes, I am primarily, or I do a lot of marketing. I am my vocation. The way I make my money is I'm a freelance copywriter. That's what I do for a living. Writing books, short stories, articles is my avocation. So I do a lot of it. But I didn't have to learn something new. I mean, I wrote my first science fiction story that was published when I was 17 years old. So I've been writing science fiction on and off for decades. And I've written books not just on business or small business, but on many topics. I mean, I've written books on sex, Star Trek, vitamins, science, biographies. So, and I've written a lot, like this book that we're talking about now. I've written a lot of books on pop culture, nonfiction books. And I've also had a book of short stories published. So, I've written I have written and published over 100 published books. So I've done a lot of different topics.
Awesome. So definitely a jack of all trades.
Yeah, I mean, a jack of a number of trades. Yes. in my vocation of copywriting, I specialize in one type of copywriting. But in books, I have always liked doing things that I always got interested in something. I said, I want to write a book on this, and if I can get a publisher to do it, I'll do it. That was easier and more common back in the day, decades ago. In today's publishing world, it's less possible, less common. But, science and science fiction is one of the areas where I do have some track record, so I can still find publishers for those books.
Okay.
If I wanted to write a book on Queen Victoria, probably couldn't sell it.
Fair enough. Now, this book, of course, is being released by our good friends at Crystal Lake Publishing. Of course, a number of other writers have been on the show. Robert, I'm curious how you came to their attention and what it's been like working with them.
Well, they're great, but how I came attention, one of their authors is a friend of mine, Taylor Grant. I don't know if you've read his work, but I had mentioned to him that I was doing this book, and I have some regular publishers in New York, but this didn't fit in with their list. I said, who would this be good for? He goes, I write for Crystal Lake. This would be great for them. And I sent it over to Joe at Crystal Lake, and I heard back in a few days or a week. He said, let's go. And that's how it happened.
Wow. I'm not surprised. This I would say is almost like a good like research companion to the other stuff.
It really is, and I love doing it. I love the fact that they wanted to publish it, so it was all good for me.
Excellent. Do you think this book is a one-off, or do you think there's more to come from this one?
Well, there's definitely more to come. I just signed a contract with Crystal Lake to do another book that is he wouldn't mind me saying it. It's basically a book specifically on how science fiction movies, books, short stories have been centered around AI. What have they said about it? What have they predicted about AI? And now what's actually happening?
Yeah, it's certainly a hot topic right now, especially with everything going on with the writer's strike and the SAG strike. It's
yeah, I mean it's a huge hot topic, and our working title is AI Apocalypse.
That's a good prediction, actually. I think it's a solid prediction. Without getting,
well, that's the part that scares me. I actually do have those concerns. That's a whole other topic for another day. I do worry about it, and some of the best computer scientists that I know, I don't know that many, but Stephen went to Carnegie Mellon. I know a couple of people from there. They are worried about it.
Yeah, fair enough. But yeah, like you said, topic for another day. Now, I know that this book also contains a number of different illustrations. How did that come about, and kind of who did the work?
Well, I was writing this book, and I said, you know what? This would be more. People say to me, what was the driving force of what you put in this book? And I said, fun. If there's lots of criteria, but if I thought it was fun, interesting, cool, neat, whatever you want to say, then I thought other people would think it is. So I put it in. And when I was going through it, I said, this would be more fun when I just started it if I had illustrations. Like, for example, I'm writing an entry on from Back to the Future, what is a flux capacitor? Why not show a flux capacitor? So I have a good an illustrator that I work with somewhat, in my over the years, not in my some of my clients and copywriting, to do illustrations for ads and such. And he loved this idea. He's also a science fiction geek. He has his car is a replica of Kit from Knight Rider. That's how geeky he is. And he said, "I'll do it, but you have to put Kit in the book." I said, "Okay." And he did all the illustrations. His name is Dave McCoy.
Wow. Very cool. Very cool. All right. So, Robert, this sounds like it was a real learning experience for you, too. Did you find that you gained a lot of, like, scientific insight or maybe, like, insight into the supernatural from doing all this research?
Yes, I could have, because I have to live in the real world of economical reality and I have to make a living. I could have potentially spent the rest of my life digging into this and had a very good, fun time. And it was a labor of love. And also, guys like you and me, we love learning stuff like this.
Mm-hmm.
And so, learning is nothing new. People will always say to me, for example, well, if you know something, why do you have to keep reading or writing about it? You know it already. I said, no, school is never out for the pro. So, I'm fascinated by this stuff. There's no limit to how much. And here's the interesting thing. I'll just be sitting in the living room, the TV will be on, or I'll pick up the newspaper, and I'll invariably encounter something that I say, that should be in the book.
Does that ever, like, bother you when you realize, oh, man, I kind of missed this word and missed this term?
Well, here's the thing. Joe and I have decided that I've already started it, we're compiling a file of terms I missed. And when when they do the second edition of the book, in a year or so, we will add that to the book.
Oh, cool! All right, I like that. You can do thing on the cover like now with more words.
Well, yeah. All you do is just say, and I've done this with my other books in the business world. The Science Fictionary, the Copywriter's Handbook, second edition.
Yep.
And it's also, it's just, to me, it is actually a service to the reader because you don't want your book to be out of date, and this way it can always be out of date. I mean, it could always be up to date.
Yeah. Now, this book, at the time of this recording, the book's been out for about a month and a half. Have you gotten any feedback from the fans?
It's great feedback because I've gotten feedback from people who comment and discuss it. Sometimes they do say, why didn't you put in more on Babylon 5? Or why didn't you put, why you missed the term proton plasma? I'm just making that up, whatever it is. And I'm thankful for it. They're not mad. They tell me, and and I thank them because they said, you're giving me my list for when we go back for round 2.
There you go. Yeah. The fans I've found are the best. I mean, obviously they're going to nitpick a little bit sometimes, but it's also cool when they can say, hey, what about this? You realize, oh man, you're totally right.
Or in this case, in this case, if I made errors, I'm sure they'll find them and spot them and point them out to me, and that's also useful because then when you go to the reprint, the second edition, not only can you add the new terms, but you can fix those errors. I used to do corporate workshops as a consultant, and I had a workbook, and the first time I did it, some student was very sort of smarmy about it and smug. Goes, you have a typo on page 9. And from then on, I would come into the seminar at the beginning and say, hey, by the way, you can help me proofread this. For every typo you find, I'll give you $1. So it became a game.
I like that. All right. Well, Robert, it has been absolutely great talking to you. And, of course, the book is absolutely amazing. Folks, if you want to learn more about it, you go to crystallakepub.com. Find the book there, but also wander around. Check out, there's so many great authors that they have under their name. You'll definitely find something you want. And now with this book, you'll know what all those words mean. Robert, thanks again, and I'm sure we'll be talking again very soon.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. I had a lot of fun.
Hey, this is singer-songwriter Danny Horowitz, and you're listening to Citywide Blackout.
And that brings this episode to a close. Thanks to everyone for listening, and be sure to follow the show on Facebook at Citywide Blackout and Twitter and Instagram at CitywideMax. You can reach me at citywidemax@yahoo.com to suggest a guest or submit music for the Blackout Collection playlist. You can find this show wherever you check out your favorite podcasts, and new episodes are aired every Saturday at 10 p.m. EST on Boston Free Radio. That's all for now, and I'll see you next time.